Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2317. Today we're going to have some fun. We're talking about Carroll Shelby, Shelby memorabilia, and things you can get your hands on today. So be prepared to be inspired.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today I'm in Leawood, Kansas, with a very special guest by the name of Vernon Estes. Vernon, welcome to Cars Yeah. Do you have any gear, and are you ready to release the clutch?
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me today, and I am more than ready.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to be talking about something that is near and dear to my heart as well, because I had a Mustang back in the day, GT350. It was a clone, so don't get me too bad here about doing that, but I would have loved to have had a real one, but it was about as close as you could get. Now, before we get into why we're talking about Mustangs here at the beginning, what's one little thing that most people don't know about you, Vernon?
Well, I think that most people don't know, if they've only heard my name or seen like posts that I've made online, they don't know how young I am. So I'm 32. I operate a business out of Kansas City. I mean, I've got an older name, Vernon. So like we had talked about a little earlier, and I think most people don't know that I'm a younger enthusiast in the hobby, and that I have 3 kids and a great wife here in Kansas City, and just love these cars.
Well, very cool. Yeah, Vernon and I had a great talk before we turned on the microphones here today about his name and about his past. And I was the same way when the folks at Mecum turned me on to you and said, oh, we want you to have Vernon on the show. My first thought was, okay, this is probably an older gentleman that is into Shelby Mustangs, been collecting a long time. And then you sent me some pictures and I went, wait a minute. This guy looks like he's a youngster, at least especially compared to me. You could be my son. So yeah, this is very cool, but we're going to learn a lot more about you. So let me give you a little introduction here. Vernon Estes is an automotive enthusiast stricken with a severe addiction to all things related to the cars produced by Carroll Shelby's band of Southern California hot rodders, Shelby American. Vernon operates Vernon Estes Classics out of Kansas City. As he said, the company specializes in buying and selling some of the rarest and highest quality Shelby Mustangs, Cobras, and other performance Fords which exist in the world today. He's a collector of all things Shelby American, including factory literature, displays, objects, glove box literature, parts, and just about anything else that was produced in the 1960s in relationship to Carroll Shelby and the company. And he's working with our friends at Mecum Auctions, offering Carroll Shelby artifacts with over 450 items offered at no reserve. That's through May 23rd and the 30th. I'll put links to that auction. It's part of Mecum's on-time Mecum Auctions. So there are a lot of cool things. If you want something that is authentic and related to Carroll Shelby, this is the place to go. We'll be back in just a moment, but first a word from our sponsors so they keep the gas in the tanks here. So buckle up. We're going to be talking with Vernon about Shelby. We'll be right back. Years ago, when it was time to renew my collector car insurance policy, my carrier's rates went up. Way up, but my usage was the same and I never made a claim. I didn't even have a ticket. So what's with that? So I turned to American Collectors Insurance. Has your collector car insurance recently raised your rates for no good reason? Tired of paying an annual membership fee? Then it's time to look around and call American Collectors Insurance. I shopped around, I asked friends for recommendations, and found a winner that I can trust. And boy, I'm glad I did. I saved hundreds of dollars every year and slept better at night knowing my baby was properly insured. American Collectors Insurance have been protecting vehicles since 1976. They provided me with an agreed value insurance policy backed by their history of taking great care of their clients. What could be better than that? So give them a call and ask for a quote today. 866-ACI-YEAH. That's 866-224-9324. And protect the ones you love like I did with American Collectors Insurance. Classic car insurance designed by collectors for collectors. Being a professional automotive technician today requires an understanding of technology, computers, and electrical systems that are highly advanced and very complex. Cars Yeah is pleased to support TechForce Foundation. It's one of our charities of choice, and its efforts to help young people pursue the technical education and careers as automotive techs. Through scholarships, grants, and good old-fashioned hands-on experience with cars, trucks, boats, and more, TechForce and Cars Yeah are working to connect young people with viable careers in the automotive sector. Join us by visiting techforce.org today. For several years now, you've heard me talk about Linkage Magazine. I've been a subscriber since the start. Their talented and creative team brings you a spectacular publication and website that shares the automotive passion from a worldwide perspective. Linkage is about driving, restoring, collecting, and first-hand experience at collector car auctions and more. They bring you real-world values plus rational, experienced opinions on the current markets. They cover the automotive world and the people who share our passions. And Linkage Magazine has grown, mailing you 6 issues annually. Join me on this journey with Linkage. They're geared for the automotive life. You can subscribe at linkagemag.com. So Vernon, we are back. So before we get into what the auction's all about and some of the very cool items, last night I was up a little too late looking at all the items you've gotten for sale. My wife was going, "Are you coming to bed?" "I'll be right there, honey." Carol's keeping me up tonight. A different Carol. So she didn't worry about maybe a girlfriend I might have somewhere named Carol. I want to talk about you because you mentioned you're a young guy, but you've been into these cars for a long time. So you're a little bit unique in that aspect. So how did this passion all start? And then we'll talk about Vernon Estes Classics.
Yeah, I mean, I get that question all the time, and sometimes it just can be a little bit tough to answer because it was a snowballing effect. So when I've been into cars since my earliest memories. I mean, my interest from my earliest days that I can remember were cars, airplanes, boats, military stuff. And I had a mom who really wanted me to read as much as possible, like for academic purposes. And so we made a deal. She would buy any book or magazine that I wanted as long as I promised to actually read it, not just look at the pictures. And so I may have stretched the rules a little bit or cheated a little bit in the sense that I would go to Barnes and Noble or Borders or wherever else, and I would just wreak havoc on the magazine section. And so, like, from the earliest days of me becoming completely enamored with cars, oddly enough, my taste, I like to tell people, sort of like divulged. It sort of like went down over time because like the cars that I found most interesting when I was like 10 years old, as weird as it would be for a 10-year-old to be into this stuff, were like full American classics and European Grand Prix cars pre-war.
Wow.
I guess because I was so into that stuff, when I started sort of becoming enthusiastic in my older years, like by the time I was, 11 or 12, for like American muscle cars, the Shelby American stuff really was attractive to me because, at least in my view, those were the only cars, the cars run by that company, whether it be Cobras or GT40s or Shelby Mustangs, they were the only cars that like raced successfully in the major European endurance races, and like they had like a worldwide appeal.
Yeah.
And level of success. And so that's why I just became, by the time I was probably 12 years old, it was all Shelby American all the time. Of course, I still love all kinds of cars. And frankly, when I go to car shows, I spend a lot more time looking at other cars than what I focus in on my daily business, just because I see Shelby American product every single day. So I spend a lot more time looking at other kinds of cars now when I go to events because they're a little bit more off the beaten path and unusual and entertaining for me to look at now. But like my main passion and my main focus has always been the cars that Carroll Shelby was involved with and Shelby American. So
yeah, very cool. Vernon Estes Classics. Tell us about how you started that and what is that business all about?
It is the world's most niche used car dealership, I like to joke, because 95% of the business is 65 to 1967 Shelby Mustangs. Like that's the meat of the business. I also occasionally do Cobras, occasionally do GT40 related stuff, occasionally do other of the rarer versions of like high performance Fords from 1964 to 1970 mostly, but the vast majority of the business is 1965 to 1967 GT350s. Also 500s from 67. I also love 68 through 70s. It's just that I handled quite a few less of those cars over the earlier years. And the reason why the business specializes in that is just because that's my passion. Those are my favorite cars. And I'm just obsessed with finding the best examples that I can find of those for a very kind of small group of clientele.
You know, you're a guy who figured out pretty early in his life how to put the secret sauce on your days, because a lot of people listening are going, How can you just start doing that? I mean, that's what I want to do. Are your customers really worldwide at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I sort of like parlayed it into the cars is that like kind of going back to when by the time I was kind of stricken with the Shelby bug at the age of 12, obviously, even, back then 20 years ago, you're talking early 2000s, obviously the cars were significantly less expensive back then, but at the same time, they were still completely unobtainable to a 12-year-old, obviously, let alone when you're 12, how could you even imagine like a pathway to being able to ever afford a car that was any amount of money, really, any above average amount of money. And so I just started collecting Shelby American related literature, memorabilia, literally anything I could get my hands on. I was really fortunate to have a person here in town who hired me to help him restore his cars. Mm-hmm. He had a fairly large collection of Shelby Mustangs and still does. And so I would help him for $10 an hour doing all the odd jobs and the dirty work that has to do with car restoration, which I learned a lot from. And then I would take that $10 an hour, which obviously, to put that in perspective, at the age of 14, 15, making $10 an hour, I personally felt that I was the richest person on the face of the earth at the time.
Sure, yeah.
And I would take every penny of that and I would buy Shelby literature, Shelby memorabilia, press kits, posters, keychains, brochures, whatever it is, I would buy it. I learned what was original, what wasn't, and I would just collect all of it. And then I became well known for collecting that stuff. And so other people who were interested in it started approaching me. And they would ask to buy things. And the first time this happened, I had a guy that offered to buy a postcard from me for $45. And I thought to myself, well, I don't really sell anything, but for $45, I know where I can buy 9 more of these for $5 a piece.
Yeah.
So I sold him the postcard, went and bought more. And that was just, the way that I sort of built up into buying and selling the cars was basically one $50 brochure at a time from the age of 14 till the age of 22 when I bought my first Shelby. And funny enough, also a side effect of that is that over the course of buying and selling and kind of becoming a dealer of Shelby American related memorabilia, whether big or small, I was building up an email list of people who were interested in those objects. And that email list, even though it wasn't intended back then, all the people that were interested in those objects, the vast majority of them owned at least one car. A lot of them owned, obviously, many cars. And so by complete mistake, I assembled an email list of kind of a who's who in the hobby and became friends with all these people in the hobby. It was kind of like my inroad to establishing a clientele list for cars that, again, was never intended, but it was just the way that it worked out. I would love to say that was like planned out. That would be, I would love to think that I was that smart to actually plan that out at the age of 14, but it was just completely circumstantial. The cars generally actually earlier this month, I sold my first car to an in-state customer ever. For the most part, they all go out of state and out of the country sometimes. Probably 15 to 20% of cars do go out of the country. But, they go all over the world and all over the country. And obviously the most interesting thing about the business, I think, is meeting the people that want them,
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's cool. It's like what I get to do all day, talk to car people.
Sure.
Which is pretty darn fun. So that first Shelby you bought, was that a Mustang?
It was a 1966 GT350 that was a factory. In 66, they built 1,000 Hertz cars, or around about 1,000 Hertz cars. And 800 or so of those cars were black and gold, and around 200 of them were split between red, white, green, and blue. And the first car I ever bought was one of the blue Hertz cars. There were approximately 50 of them made, give or take. I think it was more like 55 on the blue ones. It was a factory blue Hertz car that was delivered at S&C Ford in San Francisco after it was used by Hertz, and then was a 2-owner car. And so I bought that when I was about 22 years old. And that was kind of the first one. Looking back, I wish there was technically a way that I could have kept that car, because now I would love to have that car back again and keep it. But every time I find myself sort of opining for that, I realize that without selling that first car, I would have never been able to take that money and buy another car and then buy another car and then buy, and keep rolling that money. So at the end of the day, it was the right thing to do, sell that car, but I do miss it. And I would love one day to be able to get that car back.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard that story, I could buy myself a real Shelby. So yeah,
sure.
That's the way it goes. Well, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on at our friends at Mecum. They are doing what's called an on-time auction, ontime.mecum, whereas you're selling, as I said at the beginning, 450 items. Now, The first question is, okay, you're selling all these items. Why are you selling all these items? Maybe it goes back to that story you just told us, raising money to buy more items and keep expanding. But let's talk a little bit about this. First of all, why did you choose Mecum to do this with?
I mean, I've worked with the Mecum people before, and they've always been fantastic to work with. So that was the reason why I chose to work with them. Is I sort of handled, if people listening might remember the John Otts box sale 2 or 3 years ago, where the Ken Miles quote unquote flying Mustang was sold amongst the rest of his collection and literature memorabilia. John was a really close friend of mine, and he tasked Mecum with selling his collection, and I was sort of the person with John that like did all the sort of the cataloging and a lot of the descriptions and helped spearhead that sale. And so I had already had a lot of experience with the Mecum people and how awesome they were in doing that sale. And then since then, Mecum has their new on-time system. I mean, I guess it's not so new now, but it's really sort of gaining a ton of traction lately, it seems like. And it's an online auction system that they have that's kind of like a part of their overall website, but sort of its own section of the business. And I've always been familiar with the people, and they get fantastic results. And so that's the reason why I wanted to go with Mecum. I mean, the reason for the sale overall is simply because, when I'm buying the memorabilia, I mean, I'm very busy with the cars anymore. And so I love the memorabilia is kind of my roots. And so I love the memorabilia. In fact, I derive as much joy in finding and buying really, really rare, special memorabilia as I do out of the best and most special cars. And so when I'm doing that, though, I'm generally going in and somebody's saying, hey, I've got 500 items and I don't want to sell you the 2 or 3 or 4 items that you really want. I want to sell 500 items at one time. I want to parse it out. And so I generally am having to, write a check for everything. And then I sort of parse things out. I keep some things for myself. I parse things out to collectors that I've always worked for and worked with, and sell a lot of things publicly through Instagram, through Facebook, through my website on occasion. But, after doing the memorabilia thing for 16 years, you can't help but just have a lot of stuff that, while it's great stuff, some of it ends up sitting around. And that's not most of the things in the sale. Most of the things in the sale are fairly fresh. But I just looked around one day. I looked around my office and realized, like, why do I have all these great items sitting on shelves as like doubles or triples?
Sure.
And so I decided that it was a good idea to give the Mecum people a shot and just put it all out there and really just have fun with it, because to me, it's fun to go through the process of an auction. I think it's fun to watch. I think it's fun to actually do the work to set it up. And so I just figured, let other people enjoy some of these pieces of history, and there's kind of a little bit of everything for every kind of collector. It's not just items for people that have been collecting the stuff for 10, 15 years and are after the rarest of the rare. There's stuff for those people. And then there's also plenty of things for the guy who doesn't own a single thing related to Carroll Shelby, who wants to have something. So it should be, it's been a fun sale to be a part of so far, and it should be exciting to watch the stuff end here soon.
So the way this works is it's up for a certain period of time. People can go to the website. I'll put a link on Vernon's show notes page, but it's easy to find. Just go to ontime.mecum.com, and you'll see they've got other things going on as well. Vernon's list, you just go in there and you can just scroll through and you can place bids, and it ends at a certain date. You got 2 end dates for this sale going on. I mentioned at the beginning, but you can see it right online. So in a way, it's kind of like, I'll attribute it to like going to eBay. Most people listings on eBay for about 7 days. But here you're at Mecum. These guys not only know what they're doing when it comes to selling cars and parts, but you've got Vernon involved who really knows what he's doing. So you've niched down to that market. And as I was looking through the items last night, one caught my eye, and that was lot number CS0247, 65 Shelby GT350 steering wheel, the old Motolito steering wheels, because mine had this steering wheel on it that I thought was so cool. Made in Great Britain. I think right now the bid's up to $611. And this ends on Tuesday, May 23rd. So if you want one of those cool steering wheels to hang on your steering wall, I guess, or put on your desk in your office. This is pretty cool. Let me ask you this. Of all these items that are for sale, tell me maybe 1 or 2 that you go, someone's going to be really happy to get this thing.
Oh boy, there's quite a few.
That's going to be hard.
There's some really cool pieces. There are multiple posters, for example, in the sale that are what I call dealer only. And what that means is they were sent to dealerships, and maybe 1 or 2 examples per Shelby dealership. Of course, there were very few authorized Shelby. Not every Ford dealer by a long shot was a Shelby dealer. So there were only a couple Shelby dealers per state. So when you have like a dealer only poster, there might have only been 100 examples of each one ever printed in the first place. And then obviously this stuff was completely worthless back in the day. So if it was a 1964 dealer poster or a 67 dealer poster, the second most dealerships are done with that stuff, it would have been taped to their showroom window or wall, and they would have just ripped it off the wall and thrown it away. So the attrition rate was really high for this stuff. So for example, there's a pair of 1967 Shelby American dealer only posters. They're orange and white in color. Neither of those posters were ever sold to the general public. They were only sent to authorized dealers. One features a 427 Cobra, and the other one features a 67 Shelby GT350/500 road car, is what they would call those. They called those cars the road cars. It's kind of like the tagline. Those posters are sort of like regarded as the holy grail piece or pieces for Shelby American poster collectors. Either one of those posters, in terms of original examples coming to the market, they might only... And a singular example of either one of those posters might hit the market every 2 years at the most.
Wow.
In fact, the last 427 Cobra example to sell was in the Otspot collection 3 years ago, and it sold for $10,800.
Oh,
so they're serious pieces. Another thing would be the very first lot to sell will be a 1965 GT350 owner's manual, which kind of the backstory there, you would think, oh, it's an owner's manual, so clearly every car got one and it's not that rare. Well, they only made 562 Shelby Mustangs, only 524 street cars. And so it's because obviously our models wouldn't have likely had an owner's manual included. And then on top of that, Shelby American never thought that they were going to produce that many 65s in the first place, because they were obviously kind of the prototypical race car for the street. You know, the loud side pipes, they were very expensive relative to a normal Mustang. So they never thought that they would produce that many more outside of the FIA and SCCA homologation requirements. And so it's rumored that only about half of the cars in the first place got owner's manuals from the factory because they just straight up ran out. In fact, I know people from back in the period that when they bought a 65 Shelby brand new and it didn't have an owner's manual with it, they would write into the factory and they'd request one, and the factory would send them a 66 owner's manual because they didn't have any 65 manuals. Yeah. And so as crazy as it seems, 65 owner's manuals are now not only for literature and memorabilia collectors, but obviously for guys that own those cars, they are basically unobtainable. When they're with a car, it rarely gets separated from the car because people want to keep that stuff with the car, obviously. And so the opportunity to buy one of those and put it with your car almost never comes around. And that's one of those items that if you don't know, if you're not real familiar with Shelby memorabilia, you might find the end price on one of those to be a little bit of a head scratcher, but it's sort of one of the holy grails of all collecting. And then a third item I would point out is, well, a third kind of grouping of items is that if you search through the auction, there's a search bar. And if you search Carroll Shelby race entry, you'll come up with 3 1950s SCCA Eagle Mountain race entries from the heart of Carroll Shelby's racing career. 50s and early 60s Carroll Shelby related. On all these items are double signed by Carroll Shelby as the driver on the front and also signed as the driver on the back.
Oh my gosh.
From the 50s. And then actually another thing that I'll mention, because I can't believe I almost forgot to mention these. These are some of the star items of the sale. There are 3 original Shelby American pencil sketches. So basically blueprints, except they're not blueprints in the sense that they were fully printed out. These are the original engineering pencil sketches that were done by Chuck Cantwell, the father of the GT350 at Shelby American.
Wow.
And they show, one of them is the front view of how they flared the fenders on the R models.
Oh, cool.
The second one is the rear flare of an R model. Again, completely signed, drafted, hand-drawn in pencil by Chuck Cantwell. And then the third one is really interesting. The third one is for a set of parts that weren't supposed to exist. It's for a set of fiberglass front fenders for a GT350R model,
What?
Which it would be, if you would say, well, that sounds highly illegal, I would say, sure does. Yeah. But these are an original pencil sketch of those that were signed off by Chuck Cantwell and done by Alex Skeet Kerr, who was the second in command of the Shelby American Design Department under Pete Brock. I had that exact sketch with me in person the last time I saw Chuck Cantwell.
Oh, man.
And I showed it to him, and I said, Chuck, I didn't know that there was ever such a thing as fiberglass front fenders on a GT350R. And he just kind of gave me a kind of a wry smile and just said, that must have happened after hours, and I didn't get paid for overtime, so I don't remember. That was the end of that conversation.
I know nothing. Well, this is really cool. And again, as I was scrolling through here, I saw you even got some Bill Neal greeting cards. Bill was a guest on the show back when he was still with us, the late Bill Neal, the artist. And I met Bill years ago. I hired him to design a bunch of things for us that we put his artwork on.
Sure.
And I've even got one of his pieces of art hanging on my wall in my house. He was just such a nice gentleman. At the time he was on my show, he was the oldest guest on the show. And I always remember him, just a good old Texas boy, very friendly, very kind. Got to see him many times at Pebble Beach and so forth. So again, listeners, you got to go check this out. Even if you're maybe not in the mood to buy something, but you love these cars, you will be in the mood to buy something when you start going through this. Just be careful because some of these things are really rare. They're going to go for some good prices. So I know this is going to be a great auction for you. So again, check it out at mecumontime.com, mecum.com. And of course, you can go to Vernon Estes Classics.com, his website, and you'll see a lot of the things that Vernon has there. So Vernon, we got to talk a little bit more about your personal side of cars and so forth. But one of the things I like to ask are people that are maybe mentors to you. Now, you've been around this world for a long time. Dare I say Carroll Shelby is the consummate mentor or inspiration that drove you into what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, Carroll Shelby was kind of my hero growing up, obviously. So, I mean, aside from Carroll Shelby, I mean, I was like, as a kid, I would lay in bed at night and would fall asleep thinking about what it would have been like to be at Le Mans in 1966, or what it would have been like to be at Lake Garnett in 1963, where Shelby American had an important victory. I mean, that's like other kids were probably thinking about superheroes or the sports they were playing, and I was these people, the visions in my head of them were that those were like my heroes growing up. I mean, I was very blessed growing up. I had a lot of unusual encounters that were complete happenstance, lots of like unusual events that sort of like fostered my passion for this stuff. And I still have a lot of these experiences. So like one of those was that, you know, I wanted to do some sort of internship to be able to put that on like a college resume, to look good on a college resume. And so I happen to know through the various online forums, the president of Shelby American, at least know in the sense that we post on the same forum, would constantly reply to each other. So I messaged that person through the forum one day and I said, hey, do you guys have a summer internship program? And the president of Shelby American responded and said, no, we don't, but we'd make one if you want to come out here for the summer.
Bingo.
And so, you know, I asked my parents, I said, hey, there's an opportunity. I might be able to go out to Shelby for the summer and work there and have kind of an internship experience. And of course, my mom's first question is, where's Shelby located? And I said, well, Las Vegas, Mom. And of course, my dad was like thrilled. He thought it was a really cool opportunity. And my mom was like sort of scratching her head, like, we're going to let a 16 or 17-year-old kid
go to Vegas for the summer.
Go to Vegas for 2 months.
Yeah.
And my dad made a good point. It's like any of the trouble you can get into in Vegas, you can't do as a 17-year-old anyway. So it really didn't matter. I mean, in fact, like I ended up going out to Vegas. The company put me up in a company house.
Wow.
They gave me a company car.
Oh my gosh.
Which was probably a lapse in judgment. Not that I'm going to admit to anything here.
Of course.
But I may or may not, in like the 8 weeks that I was down there, gone through probably 20 tanks of gas. So you can probably do the math there.
Maybe or maybe not.
but that's the thing, is that, you know, actually the worst part of that experience, not that there was any particularly bad part of that experience, but the only thing that was kind of not so great about it was that like on the weekends there was nothing to do because you're a 17-year-old in Las Vegas. Not like there's nothing for you to do if you don't know anybody there, obviously. But like during the weeks, it was like a constant car show and got to be involved in a lot of things. And along with that, like right before that experience, I ended up meeting Carroll Shelby at Barrett Jackson and sitting with him in the skybox and watching the auction with him.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So yeah. And I was of course scared to death. So I didn't say much and he didn't say much, but he was very nice to me. And I was just lucky to get to sit with him for probably 30 minutes.
Wow. Nice.
And watch the auction with him. So,
you know, this is a great lesson for listeners out there. Don't be afraid to reach out, especially if you're young. And if you want to get involved in something, because those of us in the car hobby love to keep this going. And I've heard this story over and over when a young person just reaches out and asks the question. You know, you never know. If you don't ask, you don't get. If I'd known that in high school, I'd had a lot more dates. I'll tell you that. I didn't know that secret back then either. Probably better for me. How about challenges? When you have a business that is so niched down, so tight, are there some challenges with that, or has that not been a problem?
Oh no, there's challenges in every business. So I think being an entrepreneur, I don't even necessarily think there's much of a distinction between what you do if you're an entrepreneur. I think as an entrepreneur, one of the biggest challenges is staying motivated all the time. Because like what happened yesterday, whether you bought and sold a good car yesterday, that no longer matters all that much. It's about what you do today. Today is what determines tomorrow. Today's effort is what determines tomorrow. So one of the challenges is constantly staying on the hunt for great cars. I mean, one of the overall challenges that not just people like me are dealing with, but I think collectors at large are dealing with now is that if you want to buy the best cars in the world, if you're going to be really picky about, and that's not to say when I say best cars in the world, I frankly can't stand it when somebody says they have the best of something in the world, because they made over 2,066 Shelbys, and every year 3 or 4 of them sell that are the best in the world. But cars get to a certain quality level where like they're the cars that I really try to buy and sell. I try to buy and sell really clean, honest, highly original examples, and finding those cars for anybody, whether you're a dealer in the market like me, or if you're the end user, if you're a collector, finding those cars has gotten harder by multiples over just like the last 5 years.
Sure.
So like 5 years ago, it was much easier to buy a great car every couple weeks. Now it's much harder to do that. And also because it's harder to do that, it's sort of a vicious cycle, because collectors know how hard it is to find great cars. And so it used to be that it wasn't as hard. And so when a collector bought a great car, sometimes that car would find its way back onto the market again in a couple of years, because they wanted to experience something new. Most collectors, even if you're a pure collector, you want to experience a little bit of everything before you're done in the hobby. I mean, that's why I do what I do, is because I want to taste everything. But when collectors know that it's getting harder and harder to find really high quality stuff, what happens? I mean, most of the people that are buying these cars are successful people. They don't need really to sell much of anything. And so people are holding on to the cars for much longer. It's become much harder to convince them to resell cars if they've bought them, whether it's 5 months after they bought it or 15 years. Because they just know that if, like, say, a 66 GT350 4-speed, 5 years ago, a guy might have bought one of those and let it go if he was made a decent offer on the car because he knew that he could just go get another one at some point.
Yeah.
They really weren't that hard to come across, literally only 5 years ago. And now finding a really good one of those is really hard. And so that same guy now knows that if he sells the one he's got, he is going to have to scrape and claw and look under every rock and in every dark corner, just like I do on a daily basis. And it's not so easy. And so they would just rather not sell. So that's the biggest challenge. Just best cars don't circulate as much anymore. And so it's harder and harder to find the best stuff.
Well, especially, the last 3 to 5 years, you said exactly. The collector car market is in many sectors exploding. And also with the uncertainty with the economy, people are going, well, I'll keep what I've got over here. I know I'll always get some money for those cars. I'll just chuck them away. And they don't have to sell. These are the kind of things. But on the flip side, too, older guys, I'll call myself older guy, we're starting to age out. And, you got guys that are 10 years my senior or more that are passing away. Their families have these collections and they let them all go. They want, like the kids don't want the cars or the wives or whoever it might be, and they let them go. So they do pop up. But now they can see what they're really worth, because everything's out there. It's exposed. Sure. So there are very few cars that are selling. I get a call once in a while from somebody that, hey, my husband passed away. Who should I call so I don't give this car away? And so I do my best to align them with all the right people, and so they get the best price that they can get. Special vehicle stories. Is that first, Shelby, really your special vehicle story?
Oh, I'm lucky that I have.
You've had so many.
I'll tell you something that happened recently this is sort of something that keeps a guy like me going in this hobby. At this point, about a year ago, one of my best customers is the gentleman who bought 5R002 most recently at Mecum. And that's the Ken Miles Flying Mustang car. Kind of his prerogative in buying that car is obviously that he appreciates the historic aspect of it, but he is one of these guys, like a lot of collectors are, that they want to put the cars out there for everybody to experience, not just hide them away. So he wants people to hear it running. He wants people to experience the car. He wants people to sit in it. He wants people that don't own it, that we know, to drive it. He wants to share the car at basically all costs. And so he calls me and he says, hey, I want to go to the next SAC convention, which last year was in Indianapolis. And so I said, great, what do you want to take? And he said, well, I want to take the Ken Miles car. And I said, fantastic. And he said, I want to do open track with it. And I said, this is a car that had a Division I SAC restoration, so all original parts, tires, hoses, belts, everything original one. Now, at the same time, an R model really should be driven and used and heard, because there's nothing that sounds better than a G350R at full chat around a track. And so I said, that's fantastic. It's a great idea. And so he said, yeah, but it hasn't really been sorted for track use. Do you mind doing that?
Oh, wow.
And I said, I would love to do that, but I do not have access to a racetrack. And he said, that's no problem. It's got a license plate on it. So he sent it to Kansas City. And so my kind of like special car story, at least from this last year, was that I was sort of tasked with getting that car ready for the SAC convention. Wow. And the way that I did that was by driving at 100 miles on Kansas City public roads, which was interesting to say the least. It was pretty fun. So it was like sort of an experience that I'll never forget. I mean, because when you're in that car driving it, you just think of all the things that happened in that car, right, around that car, all the people that built the car, the people that drove the car, the people that conceived of the car. I mean, there's a lot of cars that people might put in sort of a category as being some of the most like historically significant Shelby American related products ever. I mean, some of the more important GT40 race cars, obviously, some of the most important Cobras. And in terms of like Shelby Mustangs, that car is like, to me at least, it's the first R model ever built. It's the prototype for all the R models. It's the second 65 built because the street car had to be built first for promotional reasons. That car won in its first race. It accounted for about half of the points in the 65 season that they ended up winning the national championship with. And it's the car that Ken Miles exclusively drove. It's the only Shelby Mustang that Ken Miles drove in competition, I believe. So a very important car. I mean, almost an experience that almost brings you to tears, like kind of gets you emotional when you actually get to experience that car. So I was very lucky to be able to do that.
Well, having race vintage cars, I mean, having an all original car, that you must have had to take a lot of those original parts off, set them aside. I'm guessing that's how you did it, because why would you dare risk, like you don't run old tires on a track. I mean,
sure. No, yeah. And we put modern tires on it and some other stuff to make it. It was actually funny. I was teasing everybody as they were looking at it in the show and shine section of the SAC convention, because it was just open track. It wasn't like real serious. We didn't want to put it out there with like all the front running cars that are running engines that absolutely never existed in 1965, whereas this car was built to the exact spec that it was actually originally built to. So it was just running open track, and it was running fairly hard, but it was running with all kinds of other cars and really well spaced out. But in order to make it past tech, we had to put a catch can in it, and we didn't have we just didn't order some sort of specialized catch can for the radiator. So we just got like a big Monster energy drink can and popped a hole in it and put the radiator overflow tube into it. And so we zip tied that to the radiator support, and we would tease people that was factory the whole time. So it was a great time. And
Carroll drank out of that bottle.
Exactly. And, like I said, I mean, during that convention, I mean, anybody who wanted to sit in that car got to sit, and anybody who wanted to hear it run got to hear it run. Everybody got to see it go around the track. And that's really the way that's the way it's supposed to be.
What a great collector to do that. That's the spirit of it. So I always crawl into my guest's head. I'm a bit of a car psychologist. I'm kind of guessing where I'm going to go here with you. You typically ask people what kind of car would they be if they were reincarnated or manifest as a car. I mean, you're so tied to this. You got to be a Shelby somehow, I would think.
I would have to be a Shelby. I was thinking a lot about this question. Like, I don't know. I don't equate myself to any particular Shelby, frankly. But like, I think that if I was to be reincarnated as a car, I think I'd choose to be reincarnated as either a 66 GT350 or a 67 GT350. And the only reason I say that is because those are the cars that I love to drive the most. I mean, a 65 is obviously a great car too, but I just kind of chose 66 or 67 350s because they're a little bit more approachable. They're kind of the quintessential Shelby Mustang. They're the two cars that I tell anybody who asks me, if somebody comes to me and says, I want to buy one Shelby Mustang and I want it to kind of fit all needs. I mean, 65s are sort of the quintessential, the most kind of, I guess, blue chip of the three, kind of the rarest, the highest end, whatever you want to call it. But you can get 95% of the way there or more with a 66 with a set of side exhaust on it for a lot less money. And it's just sort of the quintessential all-around car. I mean, 65s are great cars, but they don't have back seats, and they only came in one color. And they're a very specific, car, whereas a 66 is sort of the do-it-all. It's got a back seat. 67 is the same way. They just have a longer wheelbase, and they've got a lot more styling. I love, frankly, one of my favorite cars in the whole Shelby range is the 67 GT350 4-speed, and it seems like I've been preaching what a great car that was for 5-6 years now, and it seems like with current market trends that other people are starting to realize what great cars those are too. They're twice as rare as a GT500 and the 67. They run great. They're easy to work on. They have all the style. I mean, that's really the ultimate middle ground between some of the later 68 to 70s that are more styling but standard Ford cars underneath versus the 65 Shelby that's a K-code at heart and sort of a race car. The 67 350 sits right in the middle of those two polar opposites. So
yeah, very cool. How about a great book? Is there a great book that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I am sure this book has been shared before. It's a very popular car book, but the book that sort of stood out to me is The Last Open Road by B.S. Levy. I love that book. I love that book because I love early SCCA racing history. It's that's one of the ways that I sort of get away from the Shelby stuff a lot is I love doing research and looking at photos and looking at cars that raced early in the SCCA. And that book it's such an interesting book because it's a fictional book that's based on the earliest days of the SCCA. It's just that basically all the names and the terminology are sort of played with a little bit, but it's I find that era of post-war, the earliest days of American road racing, I think that's, even though Shelby American wasn't around at that time, when I'm reading about that sort of race history, that's I wish I could go back in time and go to the first race at Watkins Glen, one of the first races on the West Coast. That would be.
Yeah, Bert's been a guest on the show a couple times. In fact, he did a audio version of that book where he did a masterful job with sound effects and all sorts of different voices. And yours truly here got to be one of the voices in that audiobook, which was pretty fun. I was pretty honored to be asked to do that. So let's go on the Ultimate Drive. For a guy who's been on many Ultimate Drive, I could say going back to that 17-year-old who got handed the keys to a car and got to spend a summer in Las Vegas playing with Shelbys and learning about them. Here's the deal. I'm going to provide you with any car in the world. Any car in the world. Don't worry about the cost. I'm footing the bill. You can take it anywhere, and you can go with anybody, even somebody who's no longer with us. So if you want to take Carroll or Ken or whoever, what does the Ultimate Drive look like for a guy who's been around a lot of Ultimate Drives?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the Ken Miles R model drive from last year is, I guess that's up there if you're talking about ultimate in the sense of something that's highly desirable or rare. But frankly, for me, in my sort of quote unquote off time, I mean, I'm blessed to do something for a living that most people just consider a hobby. So my off time, the weird thing about doing this for a living, as I'm sure you share sort of the same sort of hobby / business relationship, is that in my off time, all I want to do is be around cars too, but in a different way. So I'm around the Shelby stuff all the time. And so I love driving some of the most historic stuff and I love kind of dealing in it and being around it. But when I'm in my off time, I actually am sort of into some things that are not all that Shelby related. They're a lot more approachable and they're just fun. My ultimate drive, if I'm thinking about something that I really want to do, I mean, I have a 66 Bronco, what they call a U13 Roadster, which was the first 3 years of Bronco production. They only built 5,000 of these cars. They had fiberglass door inserts. They had no radio. They had no roof. They had obviously no doors, just a fold down windshield. The vast majority of them were 6 cylinders with 3 on the tree. So they're this little roadster that was meant to be like a ranch rig. And so my ultimate drive is to have the windshield folded down on that and my 3 kids in the back seat and my wife and just go get ice cream because that car, I mean, you can say that, a lot of people might envision that car and think that it's slow, which it is very, very slow. But with the windshield down at 45 miles an hour, it's as exhilarating as 5R002 at 125 miles an hour.
Of course, yeah.
Because you feel like you're at the end of the world at 45 or 50 in that thing. And it's it's a rolling smile. It's springtime yellow with a red rocker stripe and it's original paint and it's kind of beat up and ratty. And I've owned it for 4 years and I have never wiped it off, which is fantastic. That's what I love. It's I've owned that car for 4 or 5 years and I have never ever subjected it to any kind of detail spray or anything, because it's just like I drive it to the hardware store, I drive it to get ice cream, I drive it to do anything as long as the weather's decent. It's just like a fun car it's a fun car just to putt around in. It's something that nobody ever sees. It's just like I like to call it like a smile on wheels.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. You brought back a fun memory. My dad had a 49 MGTC and the windshield folded down on that thing. And every once in a while I say, Dad, put the windshield down. And he bought us these aviator goggles from the old time military surplus store. And we'd put those on. Of course, they barely fit my head because I was only 6 years old. But you felt like you're going 1,000 miles an hour in a race car, even though an MGTC is far from being a race car. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah. So, it's cool. All about how it feels, though. So
yeah.
Those are great cars.
What a great story. Well, Vernon, you have taken us on a wonderful ride today, and I can't thank you enough for doing this with me. I want to do a shout out to our friends at Mecum, David Morton and Melissa Smith. They've been so great to bring you to the show today. Before I let you go, could you share some words of inspiration or thoughts of advice for people out there that wish they were having as much fun with cars as you are?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, in terms of like a business related quote, I mean, two things really have always stuck out to me. The first is fast nickels over slow dimes. I love that saying. And the second is if you don't go, you'll never know. I mean, a lot of my business is asking questions that you're pretty sure the answer will be no to. That it's about visiting people even when you think there's not going to be any opportunity there, or that there's not likely to be. And so if you don't know, if you don't go, you'll never know is sort of like the basis for, I think, a lot of successful careers in the classic car world. I mean, you never know if meeting somebody or going to visit somebody will lead to doing business with them or meeting somebody else, or you just never know what anything will lead to. You just always have to put yourself out there. You always have to try, which is simple to say, but like most of the good things that have happened in my career have come simply from trying and not being afraid to be either told no or like rejected in a way or whatever else. And then the third one, one of my other favorite quotes is that it's harder to be kind than it is to be clever. So just always trying to treat people well in the hobby, and be positive and just be like we've talked about, I'm technically a dealer in this hobby. And I feel like sometimes that term, that kind of job description gets kind of a bad rap. And frankly, it's fairly well earned by a lot of people, but I'm really just more an enthusiast that just like, I just want to make my living being around these cars. Just like everybody who's in the hobby purely as a hobbyist, they want to spend as much time as they can around the cars and being involved. And there's what I enjoy most about the hobby is not only the cars, but the people that I meet through it. So I think just having a positive disposition and like an enthusiasm for the cars is just very important.
Well, you're the quintessential guy who's figured out the secret sauce of life, and you figured it out at a young age. So my hat's off to you. Bravo for that. And I love that if you don't go, you don't know, or you never know your story about reaching out to Shelby saying, do you have an internship? We do now. I mean, there you go. If you don't ask, you don't get. You can learn a lot more about Vernon's business at Vernon Estes, ESTES Classics.com. And of course, go to ontime.mecum.com and you'll find his auction. Make sure you get there today or tomorrow because this auction isn't forever. You're going to find some things that you want to have for your collector shelf, your wall or whatever. Maybe you're lucky enough to have a car that needs some parts. You're going to find them there. And of course, you can reach out to Vernon anytime and ask him questions because he's happy to talk to people in the Shelby world. Vernon, thanks for being so generous today with your time and your expertise, and thanks for sharing your time with us today and this auction. This is so cool. Until you and I talk again, I'll see you down the road.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a ton of fun and been a real pleasure and an honor to be on your podcast today.
Well, thank you. This has been great. Yeah, you brought back memories of my Mustang. I may need to get another one of those someday. I'll give you a call first. I know you do. Yeah, there you go. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah.